Ready? You have the cameras rolling?
Welcome to Outspoken.
This better be good.
A show about
floods, mutant, plagues, man-eating plants.
Actually, it's about thought-provoking, compelling conversations with people who have something important to say, a good story to tell, or knowledge we can learn from.
Oh, good for you.
And now,
Hold on to your butts.
here's Scott and Curtis.
Hello and welcome to the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. I'm Scott, and with us is our co-host, Curtis. Hey, Curtis.
Hey, Scott. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you, too. So I wanted to start off by saying that maybe all the audience members don't know you super well, but Curtis is a fantastic consultant, leadership consultant. What's that?
I said, lucky them.
Yeah. But anyway, but in his former life, and I like to talk about this all the time, he was an actor, and he did Prison Break for a bunch of episodes and some other things. But the byproduct of that is that his daughters have picked up in the industry, and they've been doing Broadway productions and movies, and all three of them. So I just wanted to catch up really quick. Where are they at, Curtis, and what's happening in their life right now?
Oh, well, thanks for asking, Scott. I'm always happy to talk about my daughters. They're doing great. They're doing great. Danielle, the oldest, is about to be 16 December 1st, and she will complete high school basically this week. So she'll take the legal 18 exam in California, basically get a diploma from that, and that'll help a lot with booking acting roles, so they don't have to bring 22-year-old in to play 16. And the production company doesn't have to pay for a set tutor and all that. So she's pretty excited about that. Her and her middle sister are preparing to go on a voice audition. So the voice, not a VO audition, but the voice audition.
Nice.
So they're gearing up for that. I'm pretty excited. And let's see. We had a few movies drop pretty recently, so the girls are just sort of enjoying taking a little break into the holidays here and just being kids, doing kid things.
That sounds pretty cool. Which movies, Chris? I just want to make sure that our audience knows which movies in me. I want to know.
Danielle's got a movie called Apollo 10.5 that's on Netflix. She's also, I can't say too much about it, but she's part of the Star Wars universe now, is all I can say at this point. But that's a pretty cool gig it was a voiceover gig that will drop in the new year. And the middle daughter has a movie coming out with Ving Rhames and Ryan Phillippe and Kate Bosworth called Locksmith, and that's in post. Should be out, I think, first part of 2023. Nisha, the youngest, just had a film premiere at the LA Film Festival, and she was a speaker at Comic-Con for that film, and one of the actors there won best actress. And so
Very cool.
Yeah, they're blowing and going, man. They have a better career before puberty than I did my whole life.
Well, Curtis, you want to introduce our guest today?
Absolutely. I'm thrilled to have Marc with us. This is Marc Danziger, who is Marc, correct me if I get the title wrong, but it's Senior Director of Agile Delivery at Alliance Group.
Yeah, that's right. Curtis, I had no idea that you had an acting career. Somehow, like, we've skipped over this in all the times we've talked.
He won't talk about it. I have to pull it out of him whenever we have this conversation with other people. He won't talk about it.
Sometimes it's hard to separate the personas with clients, so I want to make sure we don't mix chocolate and peanut butter. But yeah, it was good fun.
We're all real human beings, and we're all way more complicated than we appear on the surface.
Well, that is those are words to live by, Marc, and part and parcel of the kind of things we do in our business as well, right? The answer is often it's complicated. So with that, I'll just give a brief introduction about how I met Marc and some of the conversations we've had. One of the reasons I wanted to have him on. Marc and I first met when we were both doing consulting engagements with Dell here in Austin. And at that time, Marc, you were working with Al Shalloway.
That's right.
And you guys came in and did a fantastic, I think it was a three-day workshop.
Yeah, Al's Agile Marathon, basically.
Yes. part of the really part of the safe approach, or at least a type of safe approach. I know Al might bristle a little bit at that. It wasn't exactly safe, but it was close. You guys did fantastic work, and I was really enjoyed talking to you, and you and Al and I got to know each other a little bit, and then subsequent years we stayed in touch. And you've got a son who's built a couple of successful companies, bought and sold, just as his father has, following in his footsteps. And so he and his wife moved to Austin, and you and I caught up for lunch a couple times on one of your visits here, or some of your visits here. But in our last lunch, we had just this great conversation that was A to Z, right? It was really wide ranging, and I just love some of the stuff that you were bringing up, Mark, and I wanted to share that with the audience. And it's so much. It's not just specific to business and or specific to Agile and things like that. It was it was about what you're reading. It was about some of the experiences you and your wife, who's also got a fantastic career, have had, both as entrepreneur and as leader, and also your children and their journey. I'd love to share some of these things with you. That's one of the things we do here on Outspoken is as you said, we're all human beings. We're all complicated. We're not just business person or hobbyist or entrepreneur. We've got these many facets, and you're certainly one of these people who has a very, very interesting story, and I'd love to hear more about it.
A little more complicated than I think the average bearers, because I'm a true dilettante, and so I wind up doing a lot of things just because I'm curious about so much. I talked at one point with somebody, and I think I made the point that they're like, well, what do you want to do with your life? And I was like, well, I want to kind of know something about everything. Is really what I love doing, and it turns out that that's way more valuable than I thought it was, because you get to make snowmobiles, right? In the classic sense of, if you know something about motorcycles and you know something about skiing and you know something about tractors, you go, oh, I could put these three things together and there's a thing, and you haven't really invented anything, right? There's nothing that you've created de novo, but there's a useful thing that comes out of it. And, and one of the things I've always loved about being a consultant is both getting to meet a bunch of people, because I'm very much somebody who just sort of thrives on, like, so what's your story? Like, where'd you, and I met some guy, I got a shot in my neck at the doctor's office the other week, and some guys there reading a book about Gödel, the mathematician. And I'm like, okay, interesting. Who are you and why are you reading this book? And it turns out that he was like an early AI guy. He had one of the original AI companies, along with like the Thinking Machine people. And
oh wow.
He and I are going to grab lunch at some point and sit down and meet each other a little more. But it's about being open to the gifts the world gives you in that way.
Yeah, for sure. So Mark, you're based out of LA right now. Eliason Group is, I think, are they based out of New Jersey?
Boston.
Oh, okay. So I'm curious, does that take you coast to coast on a fairly frequent basis, or are you working?
I've been traveling about once a month, not once a week since I got here, which is better than, I'd say the last 8 years. I really didn't start traveling till my youngest was sort of well into high school, just because I just didn't want to be away. And starting about then, I was the classic, fly Monday. I never would fly Sunday night, but I'd fly Monday morning. And I'd be home Wednesday or Thursday night, like every day, every week. And this is way better than that. And it's one of the gifts that COVID's given us.
Yeah, that's a typical brutal consulting schedule for sure. So tell the folks what you do with Eliason Group currently.
So Eliason is an amazingly big company. I did not know how big they were when they started talking to me about working with them. And they're about not quite 600 million. Core of the business is staffing, right? Providing people to companies that need people to do stuff. A lot around technology and finance. But they have a big professional services group. About half the revenue is professional services. And a piece of that is they have an Agile practice, which is the classic, we teach Scrum, we teach Kanban, we teach lean portfolio management, we do SAFe, we do Scrum at scale, a little bit of less. And and I was kind of debating kind of what I wanted to do, retiring or not. And they basically, I was hitting them up about some consulting work, and they suckered me in to help them just sort of do two things. One is to sort of get their delivery team kind of like beefed up a little bit. And the other was to help them to find kind of a new point of view on what to do. I took a year off after C Prime and I broke up. I was a regional director at C Prime, doing primarily large scale safe and agile implementation with them. And, great team of people, loved them. But there's a point where I started having kind of a crisis of faith, in the sense of, are we adding enough value doing what we're doing to justify the cost? And are there better ways to do what we do? And that wasn't, I think, a direction that company really wanted to talk about at the time. Since then, they've done a pretty good pivot, and they're doing some interesting things too.
Hey, Mark, can you kind of peel back on that a little bit? What do you mean? Because this is a conversation quite a few of us are having.
Well, it's a topical conversation right now.
Yeah.
So two things that I'm seeing are that the Agile approach, as the Agile, what I call industry, and I'm part of the Agile industry, so I don't say that with a sneer, right? My house is paid for, as part of the Agile industry. This is what I do, and I choose to do. The Agile industry, as it's matured, has kind of fallen into the, I'm going to back the truck up and I'm going to unload a framework into your building. Pick a framework. You can pick Less, you can pick Spotify, you can pick, sort of Dad, you can pick, whatever framework you want. Safe is the clear market leader in that space. But we're gonna bolt the framework into your company, and we're gonna make it work. Yeah. And there's a bunch of things wrong with that, I believe. Right. And
like what? What do you find?
Let me bookmark that and come back to it, because I want to
fair enough.
Drag my other point out. And what we do is we spend a lot, and the biggest thing we spend isn't the lavish salaries that we all make, right? And I say that with a grin. It's the change capacity we burn up in the organizations. Like organizations have finite change capacity, and it ebbs and flows, right? Because something comes up and suddenly I don't have time to change. I've got to do this product right now or we die.
Right.
And we aren't thoughtful about how we spend that. And we optimize the work we do around not sort of getting the company towards its business goals, but towards hitting a set of Agile maturity markers that are baked into the frameworks that we do.
Yes.
Right. And part of my realization is nobody cares about Agile. Right. As a customer of Ford, right? Actually, not Ford. What do we have? We have a Volvo and a Chevy. Right. So as a customer of Greeley, who owns Volvo, or as a customer of GM, I don't care whether they use Agile or not. I care whether they deliver me the product in a valuable way. As an investor in a company, as somebody who holds like Snapple stock, right? I don't care if they do Agile. I care that they solve their business problems in a timely, effective, efficient manner, and that they're successful in the marketplace. Now, I passionately believe that agility, broadly defined, is one key element in making those things happen. I don't think it's the whole game.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that we've lost sight of what the real goal is. And the goal isn't to make them Agile companies, it's to make them successful companies.
Yes.
And so, I took some time off and thought about that a lot. And I realized that, like, in our industry, that conversation was starting to bubble up. I can't claim that I'm the first person to talk about this. I wish I could, right? I have a funny story about something I thought I invented that I was going to get famous for and write a book and give TED Talks. And it turns out somebody else invented it the year before, but I was sad for a day and I'm over it. But at the end of the day, what we have to do is we have to focus on the delivery of successful value. And I don't care if you're a nonprofit. I was on the board of a nonprofit, an opera company. I support a bunch of nonprofits, right? You have to work mission. You have to work mission successfully enough to attract enough resources to allow you to continue to work mission, right? Whether you're here to make shareholder value or here to help homeless people off the streets.
Right. Yeah, Scott and I have, it's so funny you bring this up, and I think you're spot on, Mark. Scott and I have been having this conversation for several years now, and I was prematurely forecasting the decline of Agile in big global organizations, because I thought surely they're not seeing the return. I'm seeing suitcases full of cash on the table, and it's just not generating the return in most cases. And that's I built a pretty good practice of turning around failed implementations, and that's actually how Scott and I kind of got on board together on a couple of things. And so Scott, I know you are of the same ilk. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think I've got some thoughts about what the next thing is, but I'm curious, Mark. You said you were helping Elias and build a POV, a point of view on what's next, or at least what's different about the way you guys do business agility.
It's it's still in the mixing bowl. It's not even in the oven yet. If I can make a stretched metaphor, but I think that the fundamental things about it are it's anchored in solving a specific business problem. We're putting business problems first, not Agile maturity first. Now,
can I just say it, Mark? And this subject, what you're talking about, is exactly what we talk about in my current position. And in fact, we've been having this a lot this week. Is both of us who are doing a large Agile transformation together, we say pretty often, we don't care about Agile. If we never have to talk about Agile, we don't. But we have a framework we use. But we really feel that what we're, our focal point or our focus here is business outcome improvement, or winning in the marketplace, or something that's a business goal. And then we're working together. And we really believe that the framework is certainly part of it. We've certainly proven a framework that works for us, but the other 75% is all consulting. It's all guiding, it's all leading, it's all those other things that are intangible, or there may be tangible and intangibles that help you achieve that goal. It's definitely not, here's the framework, here's the training, good luck, where's my suitcase?
I have a black belt at teaching this framework, and I'm going to make you do the framework. And there's
without thinking about the culture.
Right, or the goals or anything else. My goal is for you to be good at the framework. I'm a big defender of frameworks, and I want to put a stake in the ground on that. And one part of our what I did is I have a bunch of super smart people. The people I'm getting to work with at Eliason, I hope they never hear this because I'm gonna rant about them for a minute. Right? I do not know how I got so bloody lucky. It just blows my mind the team of people that are there and that we've been able to attract. And we've got a bunch of them spun up working on framework. And what I basically did as the leaders, I said, look, I'm a big believer in this thing called host leadership, which is what I thought I invented, but more on that in a minute, which is the idea of I set the framework for what's being done as a leader, right? Is this a Super Bowl party? Is it a black tie dinner celebrating, our wedding anniversary? Is it, a motorcycle gang dash? What's the framework for this event? Right. And what are the logistics that I have to provide to support the framework, and who are the right people to invite? And how do I norm behavior to keep you in the event? And then it's their event. It's not my event anymore, right? If I'm a good host. And so we're working on, what I did is I created what I called sort of sticks in the ground, which were, these are the things that I'm going to be really hard to move off of. And one of them is we'll use and leverage frameworks, but frameworks aren't the end.
Yeah.
Right. And the key word there is frameworks, plural. Right.
Yeah.
The other one is we're totally focused on business outcomes, whatever they are. Everything we do is tied to a business outcome that the customer needs. And if it's not tied to a business outcome, then it's a technical dependency we have to solve in order to do something to get to a business outcome. And if it's not one of those, we don't do it. Everything we do is incremental. And by that, I mean, I had this kind of realization. I did a lot of physical stuff when I was young, and I'm much older now, and was a pretty fit guy, kind of well into my 50s. And there's a point where you stop, and all of a sudden you're not anymore. You've consumed all that fitness now, right?
Yeah.
And you wake up one day and you're like, holy cow, what am I going to do? And it's like, I'm going to get fit again. And what I realized is that as a normal human being who wasn't trying to make an Olympic team or trying to do something, physically extraordinary. All I kind of needed to do was go to the gym 3 or 4 times a week and just do something and make it a habit that's part of my life.
Yeah.
And so the key is, rather than doing these great transformational things, it's like the back of the old magazines where like Jack LaLanne is there, like, give me 90 days and I'll give you a beach body, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like, no, just come to the gym every day for 5 years and you'll be amazingly fit and you'll be functional and you'll have a great life. And we need to change the tenor of what we do away from these giant transformational kind of marches across the desert towards being lifestyle changes for the organizations we work with.
That's a really powerful thought. I want to hold that thought as we go to the break and come back. I'd like to unpack that from the other side of the desk, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk about that from the buyer side.
Yeah.
So, thanks everybody for joining us today on Outspoken. We're here with our guest Marc Danziger. I'm going to take a quick break and be right back.
Are you tired of working outside in the heat? Do you hate your boss? Do you want to get paid to sit on your ass and talk for a living? Well, if you answered yes to the last question, then voiceover might be for you. But if you think it's as easy as buying a microphone, hooking it up to your computer, and all of a sudden you're gonna get paid, think again. It's just like your mom told you. You gotta go to school.
You gotta go to school.
And you need to talk to actor, voice actor, director, and producer Jonathan McFadden of Prodigy Talent Training.
I'm Jonathan McFadden.
Jonathan works in the business, so he knows the ins and outs, and he can help you excel in the field you want to. Audiobooks, animation, video games, radio ads, and of course, voiceover. But you can't wait around because classes fill up fast. So get over to calendly.com/prodigytt. Yeah, that's a weird word. Here, I'll spell it. calendly.com/prodigytt. Click new student interview and pick a time that works for you. So listen to your mom and go to Prodigy Talent Training.
You gotta go to school.
And we're back on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis, and our guest today, Marc Danziger, who is the Senior Director of Agile Delivery Practice at Eliason Group. Marc, a fascinating guy, left coaster, but we won't hold that against him.
Hey.
Marc's been telling us about his point of view about Agile and transformation and his philosophy about how to impart successful change to a company. Marc, when we broke, you mentioned the industry, the Agile industry itself. Those of us who are providing consulting and expertise and coaching to companies looking to transform to a more Agile way of working, need to do less of selling the big bang transformation, or even if it's not big bang delivery style, but just a big giant transformation, and focus more on incremental delivery. But what does that imply for people who are, for example, in Scott's position, where they're sitting on the buying side of the desk?
I think 2 things. The first is, every so often I have these, what I call like Zen whack up the side of the head moments, where like the bright light flashes and you have like the realization. And I was at a client who was a serious customer to buy a transformation, a multi-million-dollar consulting engagement to buy a transformation. And one of the things we did was we built out the transformation roadmap and sketched out resources necessary to do it, and did in effect a project plan for the transformation. And it was a multi-year project plan. And I walked out of the room and I had this thought bubble over my head, which is, the first thing we're going to teach them is not to do any multi-year project plans.
Marc, you are singing exactly what we've been talking about. Is how does that go together? And I apologize. I know you guys are both in consulting, and I've been in consulting, but I just don't get how you can sell a transformation package.
Well, I think it's I think that the problem is the commercial driver in the industry.
Okay.
Right.
Yep.
Pushes both the buyer and the seller in a direction, because as a buyer, I want to make a strategic plan, and an element of my strategic plan is I'm going to move towards agility. And I'm going to make this commitment, and it's a 5-year commitment as part of my 5-year forward plan. and I'm going to budget money against it. And what I want to do, the simplest thing for me to do is just to buy it, right? I've got a 5-year plan. I have $15 million to spend on my 5-year plan. Here's $3 million a year. If someone will come and consume $3 million a year of my plan, box checked, move on.
I'd love to meet your 5-year plan company, because I can't find any of those.
They actually do exist.
Wow.
And on the consulting side, right, the holy grail for me is I want a $3 million a year contract for 3 or 4 years, right? I can keep people employed. I can drive incredibly high margins. It's a giant anchor on our business that allows us to go do smaller other things while maintaining enough revenue to keep the doors open. The commercial pressure to do that is very, very high.
Yeah, and I was talking with one of the makers of the tools out there, and I said, how do you deploy your tool when people sell packages like, I'm going to be consultant, I'm going to go in, 6-month gig, I'm going to train you, and then I'm going to walk out the door. How does that work? And he looked at me and said, it doesn't work.
Works badly.
And I think it's because what you have talked about, when I was reading about you, is that leadership, unless they are fully bought in, the whole culture just goes back to what the leader drives.
Oh, yeah. I call this make them agile.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, and I've sat in rooms with people who said they need to be agile. Right. And I kind of look at them and I go, well, what about you? Right. I mean, and I did a piece. I have a Substack that I wrote while I was taking my year off and getting my house remodeled, the downstairs, not this part yet. And one of the things I wrote is I rebuilt the SAFe implementation roadmap, right? Because I think the SAFe implementation roadmap is just wrong and flawed. And what I did with it was I basically said...
Can you unpack that for a second, Mark?
Yeah.
What specific areas have you run into issues with when you've tried to help people
The
implement?
issue is it optimizes the use of Agile resources. It's designed to efficiently use the money you're spending on your Agile consultants to cover as much territory in your company as possible, not necessarily to be as effective in changing the company as it needs to be.
Great distinction.
So that's interesting. Lately it seemed like what's worked is that you parachute in somewhere, hopefully it's friendly territory, you land, and this is not necessarily consulting, this is just the company having to fix something like this, but you would go in, you go to, hopefully friendly territory, and then you build out the ecosystem from there. And then people hear about that, and then they want you to come over here and start this ecosystem over here. So it's not a big bang, but it's something, it's a viral effect across the organization. And how does that square with what you were just saying about?
It squares well. And there's a very funny story about it. And let me bookmark that, finish the other thought, and tie it to this. Right? Okay. Which is, my belief is that in any change, leaders have to go first. And because leaders ultimately set the tone for what the organization is going to be. When Elon Musk says, I'm going to sleep on the factory floor in Fremont until we get the production problems on the Model 3 solved, right? He's demonstrating something that he expects his team to do, and it has an impact.
Can we bookmark this part? Because I want to ask you, okay, how? But let's come back to that after.
Well, very simply, I think the easy thing to start with is you start with lean portfolio management. Right? You open, and one of the other things I've talked about is the idea that I want to do this in an incremental way. And the way I do it incrementally is I use the phrase off-ramps. Right? And the reason I use off-ramps, and some people don't like it because it implies that, well, you're going to steer off of doing Agile. Well, yeah, I might. Right? My wife and I decided we're going to take a road trip up to our favorite winery in Central California. And we're driving up there, and we talked to a friend who lives in Santa Barbara, and our friend goes, well, gosh, why don't you stop here and have lunch with us first? Right? So we're on the freeway. I can't just randomly get off the freeway and go. I have to wait for the off-ramp, right? Which takes me to the appropriate new destination I want to go to. But what it allows you to do is sort of like break your journey up into these incremental chunks, which are stable, valuable, take you someplace you want to go, and where I can put it on the table and walk away. Which means that when my change capacity is exhausted, because the stock market crashed, right? And I'm a big investor in crypto, and I have to suddenly redeploy all my resources to something else. Okay, great. We hit the off ramp, right? Stop, move over here. We can come back in 6 months. This is still here. We've still gotten to this place. We haven't lost, because what happens instead is we build these bridges, finish them halfway, they crumble slightly while they're being unused. So when we come back in 2 years, we have to rebuild the part that crumbled, get a little further, right. We stop, we come back, rebuild the part that crumbled, and then finally maybe land it on the other side. Instead, by doing this thing in this incremental way where I can stop and I can start, right? So each thing has to have intrinsic value. To me, lean portfolio management, generically, it doesn't have to be safe lean portfolio management, has intrinsic value. And if we just get leaders to do that, they're beginning to act and think in an agile, value-driven way. And even when I've done LPM in organizations that were even mixed waterfall and agile, the waterfall teams were more effective because they had clean work coming in and more valuable work coming in.
Yeah.
And now the leaders are engaged and they're publicly and visibly doing something that's part of this agile transformation. They're not just signing checks. So to come back to your ink spot model, I have some pretty incredible, I also was amazingly lucky in my choice of children. When we went to the kids store, we shopped well. And my oldest kid was being an annoying frat boy at University of Virginia and wrote me from Brazil where he was doing work on a senior thesis and told me that he was enlisting in the Army. And I was like, what? Like, hold on. You know, we do not have a giant martial kind of history in our family. You know, his granddad on his mom's side was actually a general in the French Air Force, and they were very close. And I'm reasonably sure this is part of what drove it. But my kid went off and went to the Army.
And Mark, before you tell that story, can you? I think this is the story you shared with me at our last lunch. Can you just unpack your and I'm sorry, which of your children is what's his name?
This is my oldest, Eric.
Yeah, Eric. Can you just unpack Eric's history if you feel comfortable?
Sure. You know, so Eric is you know, nice upper middle class kid from California, French mom, you know, Californian dad. We divorced when he was relatively young and had a very amicable co-parenting kind of raising him up. Left high school early to go work in a research lab at University of Virginia where he was invited to do work, and in return got in-state tuition at UVA. Studied systems engineering at UVA, did really well, decided that he didn't want to be a science researcher because that would imply the next 15 years of his life were spent locked in a room with mice and equipment. And that was not kind of a path he was fascinated about. Decided to join the Army, wanted an adventure. And I'll skip over some parts of it. He went in with the intent of joining Special Forces. He did, but wasn't on a team. He was an intelligence PsyOps adjunct as part of, I think, 3rd Group at Fort Bragg. And did 3 deployments to Afghanistan. Next Tuesday is the anniversary of the first 2 deaths on his first deployment. I kind of remember those guys consistently because he came back well, and actually in a lot of ways, I think better. It strengthened him in some really incredible ways. And so did 3 deployments, came back, went to Carnegie Mellon grad school in robotics, dropped out of there because Uber hired his professors away and he didn't want to go work for Uber, and went to the Silicon Valley, worked in a couple startups, was part of an exit at a successful company called Luminar, and now has gone on, and actually I'm wearing his fleece. This is the 21st century parents like ultimate brag, is like I have my kid's Patagonia jacket from his company. So he has a company now that does basically manufacturing optimization using cameras with AI. And it's chunking along rather well, and he's working his ass off and raising a baby with his lovely wife. And, you know, he is a thriving adult, and I couldn't be happier or prouder. I wish I could see him more. That's my big downside. So that's Eric's trajectory. So when he tells me all this from Brazil, I do what any person like me would do, is I go to Amazon and I clear the shelves of books on military special forces because I have no idea what he wants to do. right? I've seen the movies, but I know enough to know that the movies are silly. And I open the book, and the first thing I read is 12-person cross-functional team, persistent, given high-level tasking, not specific kind of word, not high-level missions, not specific tasking orders. This is an Agile team.
Yeah.
And I read a ton of the literature now on special forces because my kid then went over to work for them and did 2 deployments with them. And what I realized in a lot of ways is that transformation is really an insurgency.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about when you talk about this model is what's called the ink spot model of either insurgency or counterinsurgency. And there's a bunch of literature on this that nobody seems to read, that a couple people have read, but I'm baffled that it's not more common in our space, because there's cookbooks for how to do some of this stuff. And we don't get to blow things up or shoot people or do any of the fun stuff, as it were. But we can influence people, and you build these little. One of the realizations I had is that the biggest impact I had in my customers wasn't necessarily the changes I made, but the people I influenced. And the people I'd influenced then went on to make much more impactful changes than I possibly could have made, and to amplify my kind of efforts by 15 or 20. And the problem is that in our transformation planning, we don't consciously do that. That's something we just sort of accidentally do because we go out to lunch with people because we're bored. And what I'm now doing is making this a conscious part of what we do in our Agile practice, is we are building cadres of people in organizations who are interested in this, who are buying in, and we're training and supporting them so that when we leave, they're still there and they're going to go on and keep doing this.
I gotta laugh, Mark, because last night and this morning I'm working on the presentation for the big Agile conference in Miami in March.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm working on, and I'm thinking through and I'm rolling around, is exactly that, is the importance of relationships. And it really started with this whole concept of champions, and someone was talking about formalizing champions, and for me that almost never works. You have a champion, you make it a formal role, and the minute you make it a formal role, it becomes a burden.
Yep.
But on the flip side, if you make champions relationships and you can influence them, they're like little viral pills you send out into the world.
Absolutely.
That spread that. And that to me was one of your 2x4s upside the head.
Yeah.
That those relationships become so critical as you're expanding the reach of a transformation and helping people consume it and move their culture. Just
That's
so
right.
critical.
No, it's absolutely, because look, here's the thing. There's a legend, and I don't know if it's true or at some point someone's going to tell me if it's true or not, because I'm going to keep saying it until somebody corrects me. The legend is that Mark Benioff at Salesforce years ago sent out a memo on like a Thursday that said, starting on Monday, we're all moving to Scrum. Anyone who has a problem with this, go see HR for your exit package.
Holy moly.
Right? Don't know if it's true or not, but it's like, usually you don't have that kind of leverage in an organization.
Yeah.
Right? Usually what we're trying to do is win influence and convince people to do things. They haven't been directed to do it or lose their jobs by their boss. And those relationships are what drive everything. And it's people's confidence in us as practitioners that makes those relationships possible.
So extending that thought one layer more is, and I think I get asked this more than anything else, and I'm really curious what you think, is, there's us who are leading it, but always, even for you, there's someone that bought it, or for me, there's somebody above me that I'm reporting. And leadership in Agile at the executive level seems to be one of those elusive things. And what we typically talk about is we're just happy with really what we've distilled down to passive aggressive leadership. As long as they're passive aggressive to other people that are trying to derail you, you're cool.
Yeah.
But how do you, facing that executive that signed your contract that's not quite bought in, or a leader inside a company, how do you try to turn leadership? I think that's the biggest question that people ask.
This is the the move that defines people who are good at this at the enterprise level and who aren't.
Yep.
And what I find is very few people are. I'm intermittently good at it, right? I find that the way to win them over is twofold. One is to build trust, right? To just be transparent, to be clear, to tell them what's going on and what you're going to do and how it's going to turn out,
and earn that trust over time.
And you earn the trust every time. It's and the classic joke is it'll take you a year to earn it and 2 days to destroy it if you're careless. But the other thing is you have to build a stack. You have to win. Yep. Right. You have to define a set of wins with them that you are both aligned on. And again, my new thesis is those wins have to be aligned with one of their business goals.
Yep.
Now, their business goal could be the board of directors told me that I was going to make this an Agile company. And as a senior vice president of technology or whatever my job is, I have been directed to make this happen and I'm going to make it happen. Great. That's your win, to make the board happy so you can check the box and get your bonus.
Yep.
Okay, I will help you do that.
I think the flip side is, people ask that question about leadership and they don't understand that, there's all these levels of leadership, especially in a big company, and they're beholden to someone else, and they're beholden to someone else. And you really have to be careful how much political capital that you spend of theirs. And you've got to be really diligent and not spending too much. And I think that's an expectation that some folks in Agile have is, they want to leverage more than they've really earned. You have to earn.
I use the poker metaphor when I talk about a stack.
Yeah. Right.
Which is, if I'm winning back what they're more than they're giving me, right? They'll keep investing in me.
Exactly.
But I've got to keep winning back more than they're giving me, or they're not going to stake me anymore.
Yeah, like a bank account.
And the other thing about it, and this is a real material issue to me in the Agile community today, and it probably defines me as a curmudgeon or somebody who's out of touch. And I'm always prepared to be wrong. I'm always prepared to be wrong. There is very little room in modern Agile for management or leadership whatsoever.
Yeah.
It is almost actively anti-management and anti-leadership. And it's frustrating to me. And where I think it comes from is two places, right? And one is, and I'm not even going to use a brush, I'm going to use a roller, right? A broad kind of political stroke, which is, we live in an era in which all forms of authority are increasingly seen as illegitimate. And the legitimacy of every kind of authority is under assault in every meaningful way. And sometimes legitimately, sometimes rightly so. But the concept of authority in power is under challenge. And so there's a bunch of Agilists who kind of have internalized that, and they just they think holacracy is the right way to go. And we should have a holocratic organization that really exists for the benefit of the people who work there, and secondarily for the benefit of the other stakeholders, the customers and the investors and people who put the money up. And I'm pretty violently opposed to that. I think that, and the second part of the problem is there are very, very few Agilists who have ever, as I put it, signed the front of a check, right? That they haven't been a business owner. They haven't been a manager. They haven't been accountable for P&L. They haven't had responsibility to make something work, or they had to fire a bunch of people.
I think that's really critical. I was just going to bring up this a little bit later, but you'd brought up something, and it was a nit that I was going to pick with you. that that Agilists or Agile coaches or people that run transformations really need to have technical skill. And being someone that comes from the business side, of course, I took offense and said, well, that's not the way that's working. But what I'm seeing is that the greenfield here is an ecosystem, which may include engineering or it may not.
That's right.
And what we're seeing is, and so I think what you were intimating was you have to have experience in execution or in operations or in some areas, so you understand how it attaches to those other areas, because engineering is attached to project management, which is attached to sales and go to market. And that's the ecosystem that we're trying to move in a direction to produce better outcomes, right?
Absolutely. I think when I say that you have to have technical skills, 90% of the people doing Agile in the world today are tied to technical teams. People who are delivering, what do they call it? Cyber physical systems is what Dean calls it, right? And increasingly, there's very little in the world that runs without those, which terrifies me intermittently. I just want to say, just for the record.
Software is eating the world, right?
Yeah.
You know, and maybe what you said is really true. Is, you know, a lot of Agile coaches have come up through the ranks as a trainer.
Yeah.
And that's very different. I think all three of us in this room have been a COO.
Yeah.
And or a significant manager and executive in companies. And with that comes a completely different perspective on how to run a transformation.
Well, what happens is it's the difference between playing poker for chips with your family, right? Where there's no buy-in, and playing poker with your friends where there's $1,000 buy-in.
Mark, I'm starting to worry about you. Are you a big card player?
My dad was actually a super successful gambler. He actually made as much money gambling as he made working as an executive in a construction company.
Nice.
A bunch of years. And I learned a lot from him. I played a fair amount of poker when I was young. And the problem is, you know, for me, I got very focused not on having fun, but on winning and making money, you know. And the joke, of course, is when I was really young, I talked to my dad one day and I said, Dad, like, you don't seem to love your job very much. You love gambling. Why don't you just quit your job and spend all your time gambling? You make enough money. And he looked at me, and I still obviously was profoundly effective. I was like 9 or 10. He said, yeah, but then gambling would just be a job.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And unfortunately for me, it tends to do that. And it's hard for me to have friendly kind of, that sort of thing. And I'm not interested in training hard enough to try and see if I can go to the World Series of Poker or do any of that. But I use the metaphors are really useful. I find I have 3 languages from stuff I've done from outdoor stuff, typically rock and mountain climbing and sailing, from martial arts and from gambling. And those metaphors I find are very kind of useful ways to compact ideas that people tend to usually get pretty well.
Storytelling is incredibly powerful, right? And then good stories rely on good metaphors and good similes. Mark, I also want to pick a nit with you. Take a little bit of objection to something you said, and also agree with you on something else you said in the last segment. One is you said there's not much room for leadership in Agile. I disagree with that strongly. Actually, I think there's tremendous room for leadership in Agile. In fact, I think it's a prerequisite, as you yourself said you recognized. But I think the problem is there's a huge dearth of courage, both with leadership and with folks on our side promulgating, transformation methods. Typically, my approach to that has been finding the fiduciary buyer and understanding what's in it for them, right? Because I always say sooner or later you're up against somebody's bonus.
Yep.
Right. So find out what the win is for them. Not being judgmental about it, but just understanding what are the stakes for them.
Yep.
And then delivering on that win if I can, but also apprising them. Look, we have joint accountabilities here, right? Here's what I'm going to do, and here's what you can hold me accountable for. But I need these things from you. For example, I need the bat phone to you 15 minutes every 2 weeks, right? So you can hear unfiltered from my mouth what's going on. I'm going to get pushback. I'm bringing change. I'm helping your organization to change. There's going to be some people who are for it. There's going to be some people against it. We're going to have to formulate. I'm going to bring you options and recommendations about what to do with regard to this change, but you're going to have to make a decision and enforce it. And we're going to lay out a plan together. So there's a whole bunch of joint accountabilities typically that are concomitant with these type of changes. And frankly, I think there's not much appetite in typical scenarios. As you said, it's let's you all change, right?
Yeah.
I've got spreadsheets to push, and I get it. And to be honest, I'm very sympathetic with the person who is, making a cool $300,000 a year. They got 2 kids in private school, maybe a summer home, living a great life. Why wouldn't they want that to continue? Right.
Yeah.
And here comes, some upstart guy who's never perhaps, been a manager, never sat on this side of the desk, never run a P&L, never had to worry about missing a payroll. And you're going to tell me that I need to change. Don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. Right.
Yeah.
So I think there is a role for leadership.
So I'll disagree a bit. And I think that right now there are, as I see it, really kind of two branches of conversation about Agile or thinking about Agile that people do in the world, right? One of them is SAFe, and SAFe is very intimately tied to leadership and has lots of room for management in it. And in fact, is baked around the idea of management, maybe almost a little too much, right? But we can dissect SAFe, another time. But one of the reasons why SAFe is the market leader is that it's very management friendly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Then there is what I'll call sort of counter SAFe, right? Which is everybody who's lined up, everybody on LinkedIn or on the Agile forums or places like that, who every week writes their SAFe is a terrible thing, SAFe isn't really Agile, blah, 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 blah.
SAFe street. Yes.
Right. Conversation. And in those folks, when I talk to them, right, there is very little space in the practice they want to develop for people who have the role of manager. Right? Nobody talks about the fact, hypothetically, one of the things that I do as a manager, we cut somebody, right, 2 weeks ago. Right? The most consequential thing I think you can do as a manager is you cut somebody. Right? Trust me, I'm still kind of dealing with echoes of that in my head.
Yeah.
We hire people. Right? You've got a bunch of cool people and I have to pick one person because I only have budget to hire one person. Who do I pick to be on the team? Right? Those responsibilities, nowhere in the Agile conversations does this take place. Right? The conversation about accountability, the people who talk about, no estimates, right, drive me nuts. Because look, the goal isn't a hyper effective 10-person team. The goal is a hyper-effective 1,000-person organization. And if you can't predict when your work is going to be done, how does that organization flourish? Right? Unless it's totally encapsulated into, microservices, and you're the only person responsible for this microservice, and no other product depends on your microservice, then who cares?
Right.
And there's no kind of accountability at that level. And the idea is and honestly, I've heard this from engineers. I've been managing engineers since 91, 92. And I remember hearing this from engineers in the very beginning of my career of look, it'll be done when it's done.
Yeah.
And I'm that's a problem to me.
Yeah.
Right? Because there's a bunch of other people who are doing stuff that's supposed to snap in along with the thing that we're doing. And if all this stuff isn't done roughly at the same time, it's a problem. So how do we fix that? And one of the things that made me fall in love with Agile is I think Agile fixed that.
Yeah, I think we may be talking at cross purposes, but maybe violently agreeing here rather than disagree. Let's finish unpacking this point and come back to where I agree with you. And then I'd like to pivot, Mark, and talk about your recommendations for the next phase of good operations management, which is I think what all three of us are on board for. Very good. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be right back with more from Marc Danziger.
The Infernal Guard, Book 3, Severance. The three pieces of an age-old prophecy have been found, the children who will save the world, until one goes missing. Now it's up to the Guard to find that kidnapped piece of the puzzle, to sever the links between worlds and stop an invasion from the underworld. Will they make it in time? Will this former enemy cooperate, or does her hatred live on? Coming soon wherever audiobooks are sold. Witness the end of the thrilling Infernal Guard trilogy by S.G.D. Singh.
And we're back on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis, here with our guest, Senior Director of Agile Delivery Practice, Marc Danziger. He's over at the Eliason Group. And Mark, tell people how they can reach you.
The easiest way to reach me is on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people. It is my kind of professional kind of web of stuff I learn and listen to. And I love being connected with. The other way to reach me is email me. It's mdanziger, DANZIGER, at Eliassen, ELIASSEN.com. And I find that the more people I know, the smarter I get. And the more people I know, the luckier I get. So I'm always kind of up for spending, time chatting with folks, which sometimes irritates my wife, but we'll talk about that later.
Luck is where preparation meets opportunity, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So when we left, I think we were talking about the role of management and agile transformations. Yeah. And I think we both agree there is a role and there should be consideration, but I think where you're coming from is that many of the methodologies and the coaches espousing them don't account for that.
Yeah, that's exactly
that accurate. Okay. And I totally completely agree with that point. And in fact, I think it leads me to the next thing I was going to mention that I thought was an interesting analogy you brought up. You talked about the ink spot model.
Yeah.
Agile as insurgency model. And I think I did some writing on this a while back, a few years ago. I was actually writing a lot about COOs. And when I started really looking at Agile from an executive level, I was thinking about this very same thing, and particularly about all the language at the time, which was very, very team oriented. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about Agile, the way Agile is being sold into organizations as very much like political movements, like a
absolutely
Agile teams were very much oriented, very much described in Marxist terms, frankly, right?
Yeah.
Very or small c communist terms. It was all right. There was no the hierarchy part was
right
looked at, right? And I think in some senses that's great, and frankly there's some companies in which that can work, but you have to be the right kind of company, right? You have to be probably a single product born on the web, with a stack that everybody on the team can actually implement. And to go back to talking about your son Eric and his special operations experience, the analogy I use when I'm training is Navy SEALs. And very often when we highlight the constraint in a process, and we ask the team, what could we do about this? Well, we can just cross-train everybody, and there's no consideration for the expense or the practicality of doing something like that, right? And so, my thought is, well, yeah, obviously, if you had a team of Navy SEALs on every single
right,
every single product or project, you could probably take over the world pretty quickly. But mostly, we rely on regular Army, right? And Navy mm-hmm. SEALs are special operations. High value folks. We're investing 10-20 million per person to make a Navy SEAL. So it's impractical in a lot of senses, and I think those are some of the areas I think are missed by transformation advocates.
So,
Scott, what's your
so two responses to that, right? And there's a small response and a big response. So the small one first. I believe that what we're in the business of doing is democratizing greatness. And by that, I mean, people built super high-performing teams in the 1800s, right? Yeah. Before there was any management theory, right?
Yeah.
People built super high-performing organizations in all kinds of contexts, long before anybody did an Agile manifesto or long before the new product development game was written or any of that. They were very rare individuals, right? There were very rare leaders who had the sort of the character, the personality, the insight to be able to do that, and we're in the right circumstances to let it blossom.
Mark, you talked a little bit about this in one of your videos, and that was that part of the problem with the state of the industry right now is that, the agile practitioner, agile transformation guy is trying to be the hero. And that is absolutely the wrong way to go. And you should be empowering, the champions and those people those teams that are excelling. That's the people we should be seeking. And anyway, I'm giving you that advice that you should be talking about because.
Absolutely. But what we're doing is these organizations were lightning in a bottle, right? They're super rare. And what we're saying is, okay, we can throw the dice or gamble and say, well, maybe we'll find lightning in a bottle, but it happens one time in a million. But what if 600,000 times in a million, I can make you 70% as good as that?
Yeah.
Right. And what we're doing, I believe, in our industry is we're taking what these rare confluences of people and circumstance did, and we're saying, I can take you 50 to 70% of the way there by following some basic practices.
Yep.
And, and by teaching you these things. And, I use the metaphor all the time. My main sport is bicycling now. And it blows my mind how much data and tools, like people who were Olympic cyclists 20 years ago would have sold a family member, right, for parts, right, to have kind of the data that I have as a recreational cyclist today that lets me sort of, today I'm not training hard, I need to push a little harder, or let's look at this, or let's look at that. And in the same way, we're selling these tools, which are a combination of behaviors and frameworks and structures and coaching and teaching, right, into these organizations that enable them to be really, really good recreational cyclists, right? Yeah. They're not Olympians. The Olympians are playing at a whole different level of the game today.
Right.
Right. Yeah. But most organizations don't need to be Olympians. Most organizations aren't in that space. Most organizations just need to be really good.
And this is going to piss off Scott, but I think an effective sports analogy that I bring, I think it illustrates this point is, most of the time you're looking to build the New England Patriots or the San Antonio
Okay,
Spurs.
Stop right there.
I told you. Right? I mean, yeah, Brady's great, right? But the supporting cast of characters change underneath him regularly, right? Belichick built a system that elevated people, and Popovich did the same thing in the Spurs. They're in the playoffs, 18, 19 years out of 20.
Right.
Crazy. And not Michael Jordan level or Kobe Bryant level talents as good as Robinson and Tim and all these guys were, right? And superstars don't need a system. They intrinsically have their own system, right?
That's right.
Everybody else needs a system. And that's the scaffolding I think that we bring to folks when we talk about transformation. Let's build the scaffolding so we can bring the middling players up a bit.
Absolutely. So I'll use my martial arts metaphors for a minute, right? So I studied a variant of Taekwondo with I happened to luck into having a really great teacher, Heel Cho, for a long time. And, and then you wind up teaching little kids. And then when my kids were coming along, right, they wanted to do martial arts, and there's all the little mall black belt mill, I call them. Every mall has a little black belt mill. They have a black belt club and a homework club, and the kids go there.
Takes them 3 years to get a black belt.
Right, exactly. Just show up every day. And I kind of look at this with a level of contempt of they're cheapening the art, right, whatever. And the reality is I had another realization, which was, no, the kids who do this get a lot of value out of it. And what happens is, out of that black belt mill where 1,000 kids go, 15 of them are going to get really attached to actual martial arts and going to go seek out another teacher who takes them up another level. One of them will find another teacher who takes them up another level, right? And you're going to wind up with people who are amazing artists. And same thing with music or anything else that you can think of that kids are involved in. And similarly, I think for a lot of us who are doing Agile, having a basic martial arts education, right? And if you know how to grapple a little bit, if you know how to strike a little bit, right? You're a lot less nervous walking down the street at night.
Yep.
right? I don't have to be somebody who can go compete in tournaments or fight in PK or UFC. I just have to be sort of functional. And so what you can do is you can take people to those levels, and some people are going to want to go further, and great, yay for them. What the framework, and I'm going to talk about frameworks in a minute, what the frameworks don't do is build ladders up out of the framework. And what martial arts does have, and music has, is it has ladders up and out that show, like, if I'm too good for my neighborhood piano teacher, right, there's a hierarchy where I get handed up and taught and continue to improve.
Are those the off ramps you were speaking of?
That's one of the off ramps I would love to be building. There's to continue on this on the framework riff for a minute. There's a very famous video by Bruce Lee called I Have No Style. Like, I no longer believe, and it says literally, I no longer believe there's Japanese martial arts or Chinese martial arts or any other martial arts. We're all human. We have two hands, two feet, right? It's all about expressing ourselves as humans in our martial arts. Yeah. And that's a really common thing that people look at and talk about. The problem is, he was a master in 3 different martial arts disciplines by the time he'd made that video, right? He'd done 30 years of grinding work. When he showed up he learned from this guy called Ip Man in Hong Kong, right? When he showed up at Ip Man's studio, he didn't learn the No Way martial arts. He learned the foundational pieces of Wing Chun, right? How do you put your pants on? How do you put your jacket on? How do you stand in the studio? Who do you talk to? How do you talk to them? What are the basic things you do? And so those frameworks are what you need to bring people in and give them a grounding in what you do. What we have to stop doing is making the frameworks an end in themselves.
I think that's a great point. Nietzsche was getting at the same thing when he said God is dead. People take it the wrong way. I think they interpret that as he was actually saying that's a sad thing, right? Because most people are not sophisticated enough to invent their own religion and have that propagate to a society that's healthy, right? But Scott, I think your approach has been very similar to what Marc's describing. You took what you liked from Kanban. You learned Scrum and you learned these others and you applied them in certain places. But then when you started working with Kanban, things we did at IBM and your past experience, you realized you were using a lot of those same techniques, maybe without even calling them Agile techniques to begin with. And you started applying those in your work, and you've made a tremendous difference in the teams you're working with. Yes.
Yeah. And I think where we went the whole spectrum. We went, training heavy to only targeted training, but I think we've kind of settled for now on a pretty light framework, and then really understanding the culture of the company that you're in and what the pain tolerance is and what the movement tolerance is. And then, going at that 95% of their tolerance level and just moving forward and adjusting based on their culture. And that seems to be working really well. And that framework is really pretty light. That was it. That was the whole thought.
I don't think they have to be heavy. So there were 2 points that I was going to respond to. One was the point about like frameworks and using frameworks. And the other was this whole idea of democratizing expertise, right? Of bringing people to the 75% level. And
start with the frameworks.
Say again?
Start with the frameworks.
Well, I think that I made the frameworks case really with the martial arts thing, which is that frameworks are a way to ground you in the path that you're going to follow. And you have to have some fundamental competences to do that. And, if you don't have those competences, you have to learn it all yourself. Yeah. And it takes forever and most people give up. And so having a framework is a nice compressed way to get you from 0 to some speed. What we have to do is figure out how to take the lid off the framework so that you can continue advancing from there.
Marc, that's the part that I'm not understanding, because it seems like, as you build those relationships inside a company and you find, we'll just call them champions for want of a better word, and they take that, the way that they move up and out is, if you're in a big company, they may go to another part of the company and they may take the torch from there, or they may go to a new company. Yep. But that seems to be the way that you go up and out to the next level. So I don't know that the framework is the limit. The framework is the support.
Well, it's a support, but I think it's one that limits you if you just stay in the framework.
Oh yeah. Okay. So yeah. So what's implied, I think that this is what we were talking about earlier. What's implied is that, the framework is a smaller percentage. The bigger percentage is really that quest for improvement and
Right.
adjusting to the situation on the ground.
Yeah. And in me, I had this realization this summer that I'm kind of going back to my Al Shalloway teaching, right? Where Al taught me, about like lean being the foundation of everything, because that's foundationally lean. I mean, that's what we're talking about. And I think that the notion of influence and building change leaders, I think, is something that is badly understudied and underdocumented kind of everywhere in what we do. And it's interesting. If you what was the movie? 13 Horsemen? Was it 13 Horsemen? The movie about the original kind of war in Afghanistan, where we had like 2 special forces teams who, along with a bunch of tribesmen who were pissed off at the Taliban, kind of knocked out the Taliban with our air support. I want to say it was 13 Horsemen. Chris Helmsworth.
I saw that movie, but I don't remember the name.
I can't remember the name, but basically the story of we had 2 teams of 12 guys, right, who, with a bunch of resources behind them, like went in and won over friends and allies, and were able to influence those allies to do really big, dramatic things. And to me, that's kind of what success looks like, other than getting a camera that doesn't flash intermittently like mine is. I've got to find out what's wrong with it.
Interesting, because that's the same thing as what your Elon Musk example is in that movie. The SEALs or whatever team that was were leading by example, just like Elon. You're talking about what he did for Tesla.
Yeah,
very interesting.
And they're sleeping in huts. They're eating goat. I mean, my kid.
And they also led that big
charge.
charge. They led that big charge, and
right.
And kind of helped the Afghans come along and join the fight.
Yeah, my kid ate a lot of goat in Afghanistan. That's what you do. And it's one of these things where if you don't do that, I mean, this is why we always respect leaders who eat in the company cafeteria. Like, think about the leaders who you really admire, that you look at in business and you have respect for, right? They're people who know where the shop floor is. They're people who know kind of this sort of thing. There's a famous story about an American manufacturer, and a Japanese company was going to come and give them like a giant order, like a transformational order that was going to, scale the company. And they have a meeting in the conference room, and the executives all talk, and everything's really great. And they're like, "Well, great, let's go to the factory floor." And the executive leading the meeting didn't know how to get into the factory floor from the executive floor of the building.
Wow.
And the Japanese people said, "Thank you very much for your time," and left.
Wow.
Wow. And
powerful.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think that, we need to build a leadership culture. I mean, and this is large because it includes politics and culture and business today. We have built an incredibly toxic leadership culture in this country. We built one that's founded in self-dealing. I mean, this whole cryptocurrency implosion we're watching right now is like, it's like a cartoon version of what I see, right? These people are fantasists who are self-dealing kind of out of both pockets, who, are completely divorced from kind of accountability, from responsibility, from kind of a sense of kind of honor and shame about what they do. And I see this kind of everywhere I look right now, and that it worries me a lot. Right. I think that, we need leaders in this country who care and who are accountable and who
have courage.
The shop floor is.
Yeah. How much of that do you think is driven by driven by the quarterly earnings culture that we've got?
I think it's a bunch of things. I think a bunch of it is the quarterly earnings culture. There's an interesting. I read a great book, and I can't remember which book it was that I read, and they were talking about it's like a 70s book, and they were talking about investment banking. And it wasn't Where Are the Customers' Yachts, which is another terrific book about stock investing from the 60s. But what the guy pointed out is that if you were a partner at Goldman Sachs in 1968, you made a really lot of money at the time, right? You probably made $80,000 or $100,000 a year, which was a lot of money.
Yeah.
Right?
Average
And
about 12
and
to
you might
15.
have a couple $1 million of Goldman stock, right, that you got granted every year. But here's the deal: you couldn't sell it till you retired or left the firm.
Yeah.
Right. And you couldn't sell all of it if you left the firm before a certain date. And so your fate was tied in a really long-term way to the fate of the organization. And what we've done now is these guys are getting $100 million bonuses every quarter. And like, once you've made $100 million, do you care about the next $100 million? Does it, I mean, is your life meaningfully going to change because you won 200 million rather than 100 million?
Well, I guess the real point is the incentives are not aligned with the success of the company. So
that's right.
As soon as those are misaligned, then you're.
And that's exactly what we've done is we've built a set of incentives that advantage what I call the professional managerial class. Yeah. You know, college administrators today are making incredible amounts of money while their students are going broke.
Wow.
Yeah, it reminds me of Solzhenitsyn and stories about what's the Russian term for the bureaucrats in the middle?
The apparatchiks.
Apparatchiks, yes, thank you. Yeah, it's exactly that. It really has turned into. I mean, and the difference in pay is like almost an order of magnitude different. I mean, it used to be, yes, your CEO made 6-8 times what the average shop floor worker made, but not 5,000 times.
That's right.
What they made.
and so there's been this giant sort of uncoupling, right?
Yeah.
And it's part of that is reflected in the fact that, you know, everything is now driven by quarterly earnings, and you live or die by your quarterly earnings, and you live and die by your the financial performance of the company matters more than the actual functional performance of the company.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, you know, and so how do we kind of claw some of that back? I mean, how do we pull back towards, because I genuinely believe that leaders who lead with the intent of having everybody thrive and succeed, right? I think that there's a hunger for that. I think that our companies are better off when they have them. The leaders.
I'd like to close with that point, Mark. I'd like to get both yours and Scott's ideas. How do we overcome that? I think that's a genuine. I think we're all three agree that's a genuine problem, and we're passionate about that. But at the same time, we have to be realistic and say that is the landscape today that we operate in, and people looking to build, as you said, to democratize excellence. We have to work within those constraints.
Absolutely.
So how do we do that? So Scott, you're currently sitting behind the desk in a role just as Mark is. How do you see the way forward?
I would say first, you can't paint yourself in the corner. If you behave a certain way to the market expects consistent behavior. So if you start, first of all, you're looking for the gap. Do you have an opportunity? Are you a new leader, or do you have a honeymoon period with the market that you can actually start to implement differences or show a different behavior? Because I think the market respects that consistent behavior. And if you're consistently telling them you don't care about quarterly earnings, you care about the success of the long-term success of the company, and you're going to invest when you need to invest, and you're going to back off when you need to back off. I think that's what needs to occur. And I think there's a little bit of a nervousness about changing, but we've just got to look for those opportunities to grab the ability to change, those honeymoon periods, things like that.
So part of me thinks that we're at the closing edge of a cycle, right? And I really think if I look at the cycle, it began kind of about the time kind of I started school, right, in the 70s. And basically it was the boom years in which we financialized everything in the economy, right? We incented people to go work in financial, engineering more than physical engineering. Yep. We built an incredible amount of wealth doing that, but the wealth is on kind of a unstable foundation. Mm-hmm. And I think we're seeing the instability, and we're all smelling the instability right now. And I think that in moving into whatever that next cycle looks like, right? I think a lot of this stuff is going to get washed away. I hope. And I hope it's done without too much pain to the people who get washed with it. And I think that the new organizations that survive and thrive in these settings are going to be organizations that perform, that actually deliver, that are, you know, mission focused and successful, and that have that kind of institutional alignment. I personally believe that a lot of it's regulatory. I'm big fans. There's a guy named Matt Stoller, you know, who writes a lot about this. I'm a big believer that we unwound a lot of very good regulation from the late 60s through the late 70s that enabled a lot of this to happen. And that at some point we need to start talking about whether it's worth it or possible to create new regulations that have the same impacts. And I think that the system we built is remarkably fragile. I think we're all, you know, watching the lines on our screens every morning and going, how's my 401k doing? And being nervous about that. And I think that a little more reality and stability, albeit at a somewhat lower level of wealth, might not be a terrible thing for a while.
Yeah. So I'll close with this thought, because I don't want to make it too much of a downer here at the end. But I'll say I think what's interesting right now in this period of time, we just saw FTX implode and take $16 billion of value with it. We saw several other cryptos implode as well. Right now, we're seeing Elon Musk comes into Twitter and basically lays off 7,000 people. Facebook follows quickly, 11,000. Amazon, 10,000. Hiring freezes at Google and Microsoft and Apple. 130,000 layoffs this year just in the sort of tech startup unicorn landscape. So I think what's interesting in this period of time is we're seeing heroism of the individual, just as sometimes in our transformation consulting, we see heroism of certain people in teams. But in an effort to, as you said, Mark, to democratize excellence, I think we're going to need to see, wholesale change in the way companies are managed and the measurements by which they manage. I'm hoping to make a little bit of a dent in that with a small piece of software that a colleague of mine and I are building right now. And part of that software will include some training. It's a training game, and it will actually be some software that will include some training for managers about how to incorporate some of the principles you're talking about and illustrate those in game form. So that it should be, it's not intending necessarily to solve the problem or even to propose the solution, but to help people ask the right questions. And I think that's where it always begins, getting smart people in the room talking, like our two. My two colleagues today.
I don't believe there's a solution to any of the big problems we face. Right? There's a famous book called The Hedgehog and the Fox by Isaiah Berlin. Yeah. And the hedgehog knows one great thing, and the fox knows many little things. And I'm a big believer that we need more foxes in the world. Right? That we all need to know that we're going to solve these things with a lot of little things that we do. And it starts, what's the joke? That everything starts with us making our beds and doing our dishes. And that if we make our beds and do our dishes, then like our lives become more orderly. And then if our lives become more orderly, it spreads and goes from there. And I really do think that, a lot of his personal, I strive to personally be the kind of person that I think ought to be leading stuff. Am I there? Nah. Right? Am I making progress towards being there? Some, enough, don't know. But I think, we all need to do it in our own little spaces. And I think that right now, in the craziness that we're seeing, building responsive organizations that can effectively deliver value, which is what all three of us seem to want to do, is the entire game.
Mark, would you say also that, even in our own industry, there seems to be or a potential for a shakeout? But the difference that I'm seeing is that organizations are starting to realize the talent within their organization that can help them optimize for what's left. And I'm seeing that more now than I have in the past, whereas, typically, you go through a business cycle and, You can't afford the Agile guys anymore. You can't afford marketing. You cut your sales, all those types of things. But I'm seeing more of an acknowledgement that if you're good at what you do and you bring enough to the table, they're depending on you to help optimize what's there.
I think there's what's the famous Warren Buffett line? When the tide goes out, you see who's wearing pants.
Who's swimming naked? Yeah.
I think I think the tide's going to go out, or it's going out. I think that in our industry, as in other industries, there's going to be a big sort. A lot of the sort is going to be just pure dumb luck. I mean, people are in the right place at the right time and they get hit by the meteor. But a lot of it is going to be, I think you're going to see people who do tie to value, who do effectively deliver change, who do embrace accountability. And this is kind of the advice I'm giving kind of young Agilists who I talk to, right? Be accountable, right? Be visibly accountable for change and the impact of what you do. Don't tell me that you taught 5 classes and you stood up a team.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Be accountable for this change and embrace it and own it and make that your mission. Right. Be humble. Right. You're not the hero. You're the spirit carrier who's enabling the hero in the scene. The hero in the scene is the person who's making the thing that makes the organization money. My dad was an exec at a construction company, which was heaven if you're a little boy, by the way. I got to say, if you build high-rise construction site, there's nothing cooler for a 9-year-old boy in the world than a high-rise construction site. And I asked my dad one day, like, what do you do? Right? Like, you don't run a crane, you don't pour concrete, you don't weld. Like, why are you here? and he sort of laughed, right? And he looks at me and he goes, well, I make sure we know what we want to do. I make sure that I have good people to do it. I make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And I make sure they have everything they need. And I'm like, even today, I don't think I can come up with a better definition of an Agile leader than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or a leader, period. I think there's going to be a deprecation of that term. Right? I think it'll just blend into, this is just good management, right? This is what good managers do. Yeah. And I think that the SBFs of the world, the people who are showy with great narratives, right? I keep hoping are replaced by people who have dirty hands and are humble and build and support great teams. That's my goal. I want to help that turnover happen. And that's my career kind of mission as I see it.
That is a perfect place for us to drop off. That's a fantastic thought.
That's a great ending.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark, from your lips to executives' ears, everywhere. Hey, Mark, it's been great talking to you. Thanks for taking time here on the Outspoken podcast. We really appreciate you.
Absolutely, really enjoyed this. I'd love to. I will absolutely catch up on all of them and love to do more.
That sounds good. Well, folks, thanks so much for joining us today on the Outspoken Show with Scott and Curtis. We'd like to thank our producer, Brad Thomas. Thanks, Brad, for all you do. And if you're watching us on YouTube and you enjoyed the show, please go ahead and click on that like button. Or if you want to hear more, then please click on subscribe. And by the way, you can also view us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and then direct if you want at outspoken.show. So until next week, take care, everybody.
Bye for now.
Bye.